you work in the cybersecurity industry, in particular as a vendor, as an investor, as a CEO of a security company, you're totally going to want to stick around here. I've got one of the really icons in our industry who works executive search and does management consulting, helps people with their careers. So if you work in that area, I hope you stick around. I think you'll find some very useful conversation. I'm Ed Amoroso from TAG. I want to welcome you to my discussion. I've got a good friend here, Kyle McIntyre, who runs a business called McIntyre Associates. He's going to tell you a little bit about that, does executive search and also management consulting. And he's a very capable, very knowledgeable person in cybersecurity and also in some adjacent areas. We may dig into some areas that for you watching from a career perspective might give you some options as the cybersecurity industry continues to change. Kyle, thanks for making some time today. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invite. I'm super excited to be here and really looking forward to the discussion.
People love hearing secrets from executive search firms. It's like, oh, they take their pen out and go, hey, how do I double my salary? How do I let's hear that. But we'll get to how you double your salary in a minute. But first of all, tell us about your business. I mean, a very unique story that involves your family and so on. Tell us about the company.
Yeah, thanks. So sure, of course, I'm Kyle McIntyre, and the company that I own and operate is called McIntyre Associates. And today, it's just me. And prior to today, it was a father and son organization, and before that, it was just my dad's company. So my dad, Jeff McIntyre, started the company back in the late '80s, and kind of always specialized in growthy industries, and always got very involved in one industry at a time. Had some notable exits in telecom and did some work with the government and military and things like that before that. But long story short, since 2001, this company has been solely focused, or virtually solely focused, on helping cybersecurity vendors to build out their management teams. So typically retained by a board member, an investor, CEO, for either one very key role that's going to require a lot of care and attention and answer seeking and things like that, or multiple roles to help build out the team and achieve an exit. And so most notably, we did help build the team that took CrowdStrike public, and a handful of other very notable cybersecurity companies along the way as well. So happy to dive into detail on any of that. The long and short of it is I help build management teams for enterprise SaaS vendors.
So that must be, I mean, it's even with 23 maybe not being the same as 21, still pretty vibrant area. Would you characterize sort of the state of the commercial market for staff, for executives, for talent?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. So it's certainly been, for the industry in cyber, it's been an interesting year from a lot of different perspectives. But from a company,
we're filming this at the end of 2023, so we're referencing 23. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So 23 has been a lot different than 20, 21, 22. I mean, you would think that the pandemic would have slowed us down, but it didn't really until this year. And I do think that part of the slowdown is it's symptomatic of all the leftover, fallout from the pandemic. But anyways, if we put aside kind of notable cyber attacks and things like that, SEC regulations for a minute, and just talk about the kind of the executive talent pool in cybersecurity, I think for the first time in a long time, there are more executives than there are roles for. And when I say there are more executives than there are roles for, I mean there are more really great executives out there that deserve to have great roles that are either still working and looking for the next great role, or they find themselves between roles, right? So it's an interesting moment in time for cybersecurity because the problem's certainly not going away, but consolidation has been happening a lot in the last couple of years. Private equity firms are scooping up lots of cybersecurity vendors. Larger companies are scooping up cybersecurity vendors. I mean, even yesterday, it was announced, I think, that Palo Alto is going to be taking Talon Cyber private, and just on the heels of the Dig Security news as well. And by the way, and it's interesting because I'm of two minds on consolidation from a company building perspective. I think the technology, probably consolidation is the right thing, right, at the end of the day. But I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this journey, right? We're still going to have waves of innovative startups and things like this, but the path from uh, founding the company through getting funded through achieving an exit has looked very different for companies in the last couple of years than it did for the 5 years before that. And what will it look like in the next 5 years? I don't know yet. But what I have seen is, let's talk about the acquisitions for a second. So the startups that are getting acquired, many of them never really needed to build out a really robust go-to-market function. They didn't need to hire, a super high-powered CMO and CRO and build a, ironclad RevOps function. Rather, they're focusing more on building the product, keeping their customers delighted, and getting acquired before they have to build out a go-to-market function that's going to be very expensive. It's going to take a while to get running and to show results as well. So is that the right approach? I think that's it depends on who you ask, right? For the investors right now, that's probably the right approach, right? Um, but it'll be interesting to see in the next 5 years, do we get back to a place where most startups and smaller companies are looking to go all the way, to an IPO or to become, 800, 900,000 person company of their own efforts and volition. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's a very interesting and unique time for the industry from a talent perspective.
For people watching right now who work in the industry, let's say you're in the marketing team of a vendor, or you do some kind of sales, or you're an executive, or even a president or former founder, what's your advice? Is this still a pretty vibrant industry? Is there a nice career that somebody can continue to forge for themselves in cyber, or should they be looking elsewhere?
It's that's a two-headed answer, because on one hand, I think cyber's not going anywhere. People are going to continue to, people are going to continue to innovate. There may be less, like I said, less seats at the table though, and I think that for a lot of executives who have spent a long time in security, they've lots of valuable lessons learned, and lots of valuable experience that I think other industries that are kind of starting to heat up could really utilize. And so while some people in cyber are, they're diehard, cyber's in my blood, I'm never going to leave cybersecurity, and that's great. But there are other executives out there that I've talked to, frankly, that are ready for a little bit of a change and wanting to stay focused on a technology that has, world-changing implications and national security implications and things like that, and also a light at the end of the tunnel with regards to achieving an exit and getting paid and things like that. So I definitely think maybe it's going to be a little bit more difficult in the cyberspace again, like it once was before we had this kind of explosion and all these phenomenal IPOs and things like that. I think it'll get more difficult for a while, but it's not going anywhere. I'm not going to turn away from cybersecurity anytime soon. And at the same time, though, for the people who do feel like there's a door closing, there's another door opening, in other industries. Who really need the experience of people who have been through hypergrowth, who have worked with institutional investors, who have created categories and had to navigate that whole journey of, how to stand out in a noisy industry, not only to cut through that noise, but also for yourself to understand how to decipher it and like divine what's real and what's just hype. So if you want to continue to pursue your career in cybersecurity, I think there's definitely a place for that for the next, several years, probably decades. But at the same time, I think if you're looking for that, that hotbed of opportunities for lots of hyper growth and also lots of roadkill along the way, just like we had in cyber for the last couple of decades, there are other spaces out there that are heating up, like artificial intelligence, and we talk about the kind of the Hollywood the part of AI that has the most Hollywood potential, right? Generative AI. But I think there are innumerable other applications, that we can use AI for, that are going to draw lots of investment. And really, it's going to be kind of another similar space to cybersecurity, I think, in many ways.
Is that one you think you'll get involved in? Are you going to maybe bleed into that adjacent area in terms of your own practice?
I think so. I mean, I love cybersecurity. I love the personalities. I love the challenges here from my perspective as an executive recruiter, right? But what I also really have fallen in love with is the business side, how to build businesses and how to, match the right personalities to the right, teams to the right mission. And so helping young businesses navigate those challenges is really like one of my core passions. And so if the AI space gets to a place where they could utilize somebody like me, I would be very excited to participate that way as well. But again, I'm not turning away from cyber anytime soon.
Tell me a little bit about how you work personally with both the buyers and sellers, buyers being the hiring organizations who probably engage in some sort of a retained search relationship with you, and also the
Mhm.
sellers, the people like me, who are kind of practitioners out doing things like a marketing exec or a sales executive or a revenue executive. Well, tell us a little bit about how you work with each of those. What's your approach?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, listen, I've worked with very small companies on the vendor side, seed stage, Series A, all the way through IPO and much larger companies. I've also worked with like Cisco, right, and United Technologies. So I've also worked with much larger companies, and it's a different motion. It's different personas. They want different things from me, and they're receptive to different things, which keeps my job really interesting. So on the vendor side, there's a lot of different types of companies that I've worked with, right? But at the end of the day, for them, it's really all about being comfortable that we found the right person, right? And how do you make them comfortable that we found the right person is to give them as much visibility as you can, visibility into the talent pool, visibility into, current, salary trends and things like that, that I uncover real time on the search. So that's always it's very fun and very interesting to kind of be part of that and help influence what kind of person ends up in the role. On the other side, when I'm doing searches for CISOs, chief product security officers, red teamers, and more niche, specialized security talent, it's a very different conversation because for those companies, revenue and growth and getting to an exit is not the goal for this role, right? And while that's definitely a consideration, and some companies are willing to view a CISO as a potential revenue generator in some ways. Most companies are not, or they don't know to think about it that way. And so that's a whole different kettle of fish, a whole different conversation. And that one always starts out with, trying to figure out who the right type of person is going to be, but not based on the culture and based on the personalities, at least in the beginning. It's really going to be level setting expectations for the client about what do you think you need. And then let me go out there and collect enough data to come back and help you understand if what you think you need is actually what you do need. And then once you get through that, it's like, well, what's actually possible too, right? So that's a whole other piece of the equation. But very different, very different. It's almost like two different jobs, actually, working with the vendors versus the other side. And I enjoy both equally.
When you're working with an individual, you're talking to them, say about a CMO job at a cybersecurity company or something like that. What are
Mhm.
some of the things you're looking for? Like, are you looking for industry knowledge or management expertise, ability to communicate? I'm guessing you're going to say all of the above, but maybe you can help us understand what people should be emphasizing as they build their own career in this industry. Because I
Mhm.
see some people potentially taking more of, say, a social media analytics online, I'm good with tools approach. I
Mhm.
see others saying, taking the, hey, I get along with people. I like to, meet people and learn about them, and I can read them by spending time with them. Maybe more personal, kind of more human touch. And then all
Sure.
of the above. What are your thoughts there as people nurture their own skills and try to develop into successful executives, both in cyber and I would imagine it probably extends into AI? What would be your advice?
Yeah, I would assume that actually this could be useful for anybody in an
Yeah,
enterprise software company, anybody in
yeah.
a SaaS company. So, you know, yes, all those things are on the list, right? But it's a list of priorities and they shift around depending on the client, depending on the search. And so, you're right. If we take marketing, for example, there has been kind of this divide where you have a lot of people who are very focused on the tech stack,
Yeah.
metrics, ROI, all that stuff is critical, right? But some of those people, uh, which you alluded to, kind of have forgotten to pay attention to the other side as much. And I'm sure they'll get back that because you can only stare at numbers for so long until you want to talk to a person, right? Unless you're a CPA or something. So, for the companies, what do I look for? It's going to change depending on what they have and what they need. But if I'm talking one-on-one to an executive about their career and there's not an opportunity I'm recruiting for in the conversation, then what I really try to do is help them. We'll use the resume as an example. Take a look at the resume. Most people write it with themselves in mind, naturally, right? You're writing about yourself, and who knows you better than yourself? Nobody. So when you write the resume, like everything makes sense to you. But when the reader picks it up, it doesn't always land, and sometimes it doesn't even come close, even if you're perfect for the job. And I don't want to get too much focused on a resume conversation here, but I do think that it's helpful to kind of extrapolate, beyond that with this concept of um, keeping the audience in mind when you're presenting yourself, when you're writing a resume, and kind of putting yourself in their shoes. Like, what context do they need up front to really appreciate what I'm going to tell them next? And I have this conversation. I know we keep coming back to resumes, but when I do have this conversation around resumes, I actually like to use like a movie or a book as an example. You have, when you watch a movie, the first 5 minutes, you get exposition on the main character, right? Here's all the stuff you need to know about this person so that you can understand the rest of this story. And so it's a helpful analogy for resumes, but I think in general, when you are presenting yourself to the world, to potential employers, to your team, whoever, making sure that you care for that piece up front. What context does this person need so that they can appreciate who I think I am? Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, that's really good advice. Is it, for me, I tend to look at LinkedIn when I want to find somebody, even if they send me a
Right.
resume. Do you find that it seems like that it's the great normalizer in some sense that everybody has to work within the confines of a very similar kind of structure? Seems to me like it's easier to compare candidates. I don't know what your thoughts are on LinkedIn and how important that is.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. So at the executive search level, I get this all the time. Hey, candidate, do you have a resume that's up to date you can share with me? I don't, but it's all on my LinkedIn. That's
Yeah,
fine. But if the board, if I'm presenting candidates to the board and four of them have a resume and a great LinkedIn, and you didn't take the time to do the resume, it doesn't look great. And this is more of a cultural consideration, I think. Um, so I do think you need to have a resume that's up to date. You might even want to have a couple different versions depending on what kind of roles you're interested in, because in today's day and age, there's no one size fits all. I mean, if you've been a CISO, you could do 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 other jobs, right? And you probably need a tailored resume for each one of those if you're pursuing them. So I do think, yes, definitely you should have a resume. Don't try to make it look fancy, like no columns, just linear up and down. Don't worry
yeah.
about it being one page, 2 to 3 pages is fine. So definitely have the resume. But getting back to LinkedIn, you're right. It's an amazing tool. I mean, uh, I spend a lot of time thinking about the way my LinkedIn looks because that's your first impression in a lot of instances,
Mm.
right? And so, you know, it's also a free resource. And so yes, absolutely, I think it's worth optimizing your LinkedIn. It's worth keep an up to date profile picture. It's like everybody has an older profile picture, and that's just fine. But when you do get on video with somebody after going back and forth for a while, you kind of want to feel like you're talking to the same person you've been corresponding with, right? So I think there are a lot of different considerations for keeping your LinkedIn, optimized. But there are also drawbacks to LinkedIn, or limitations, I should say, right? Depending on what industry you're listed in, you might not get as many views in peripheral industries that you are interested in. So you do have to be proactive, but it's a phenomenal tool and you should use it.
The one thing I've always found weird about LinkedIn is that you're only allowed to be one thing on LinkedIn. Like I'm an example, so I'm both a college professor and also run a company, but you can only be that one thing. You can't have Ed A and A B. Whereas in terms of your CV or a resume, you could make up 20 of them,
For
presumably,
sure.
which I would imagine you probably coach people to do. So
Hmm.
let's get back to the question of AI, because that's a pretty fascinating possibility. Do you foresee there being some opportunities where people in cyber might be able to take that specifically to AI. Is that a good option for people as investors spend more money there?
I absolutely. I think that we're a little earlier, into the journey than maybe the average person would think, based on how many headlines and how in the news ChatGPT is and things like that. But as I mentioned before, I mean, there are much less interesting on the surface interesting applications for AI, and a lot of them, although they might not be Hollywood material, they're going to make a lot of money for a lot of people, and they're going to change, they're going to affect a lot of change in the world, I think, with their products and things like that. And so, absolutely, I think there are so many parallels between potentially what's coming in AI and where we've been in cybersecurity. And all of those lessons learned, I think, if you can manage to attract somebody who has a great track record in cyber, who has a great business acumen, has been through exits, has been through hypergrowth, if you can manage them to attract them to your early stage, AI company, which is a category creator, maybe you don't even know what category you're creating yet, and that's why you probably need executives like this. If you can manage to attract those people, I think that's a huge win. And then you just have to be careful to keep them happy and give them what they need and to set you and them up for success, right? There's a lot of unknowns, just as there have been in security, right? And continue to be. How many subsectors of the industry do we have? There's dozens of them. And I'm sure there's going to be dozens more in the next few years. And in AI, similar to cybersecurity, even today, 20 some odd years into this whole journey, for the vendors, anyways, we still have this problem that we have to solve of like, there are endless amount of problems that can be solved out there with AI. And there's probably an endless amount of people out there who want to solve all those problems. But it's going to come down to what problems are customers willing to pay to have solved now, right? And so for the executives going into the AI space, that's going to be the question on their mind, because we've been there and seen that, right? We've seen tons of companies come out of stealth, get funded, look really exciting, and then that subsector of the industry kind of fizzles a little bit, or it becomes a feature, And so I think in the AI space, that's a double-edged sword, right? Because you're going to have executives coming from cyber that understand that dynamic and can help you kind of navigate and wade through all the hype. And then vice versa, these executives are going to be taking on an extraordinary amount of risk joining these early stage AI companies. And, um, you know, if you're risk averse, then the startup game's not for you anyways. But there are a couple key differences, I think, that um, that are kind of striking in terms of where cyber was in the beginning, and maybe you can speak to this, versus where AI is now. I mean, we're kind of at the ground floor for what I think is coming in AI, and yet some of the major companies out there, Microsoft, IBM, are already major players in AI. And back in early 2000s, I'm not sure that was the case for cybersecurity. So that is one dynamic, and that can be good or bad. You could view that as that's the 800-pound elephant or gorilla in the room, right? That we need to worry about. Also, maybe a potential acquirer, a potential partner, an accelerator for us. So, as I said, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think getting DNA into your company that has been through these kind of motions before is super valuable.
My observation in AI is that it's so wide open. Like, take your example of resumes and LinkedIn. If you and I started kyleandedresume.com, and what we do is scrape your LinkedIn, pop it into ChatGPT, it pumps out a resume, we send it to a crowd, the crowd gives comments, the comments go to the AI, it updates the resume, it goes to a formatter, and out pops a beautiful resume. There's a million questions about whether that would really work as a business. Like, first of all, what are the legal and license issues that we're violating doing something like that? A million. What is the barrier to entry? Pretty low. Other people could do something similar. Or it could be the greatest app ever, and we get acquired by, SAP next week or something.
Or you build it on ChatGPT and then they pull the rug out from under you, like I think just happened to a lot of companies, right?
So it's a weird kind of thing where in AI, it's pretty obvious that we're going to see Wild West, and it's going to be exciting. But I'm glad to see that you'll be there to help navigate. Hey, Kyle,
I'm a little bit of a cowboy myself, so the Wild West sounds like a lot of fun.
You're nimble. It's good to be a small company. You can move on a dime, which is awesome.
Yes.
Give us some closing advice here. There's a lot of people who are watching right now who probably work in cyber and quite frankly are probably a little bit concerned. What sort of closing advice might you have for them as they
Yeah,
navigate, from an expert to them? What would be your advice?
yeah. So it's a good question. I think this is the advice that I've given so many people over the course of the last year. And listen, it's been slow for me too, right? You're not alone. I have conversations with people in companies that I think are great companies that they should stay at. And they shoot me a note saying, "Hey, what else is out there? I'm not sure about this." And I get back to them and say, "No, no, like calm down. You're not alone. Everybody's going through this right now. Even great companies are going through it right now." So I would say if you're still passionate about this industry, um, nothing in the industry has changed with regards to building businesses in the long term. I think, right? We have these SEC regulations, we have these notable hacks and things like that. But overall, like the macroeconomic environment has been what's really tamping down, I think, growth and making everybody's jobs a little less fun this year. And so I would say if the economy all of a sudden it's all rainbows and butterflies and it's all great, and then you're still having a hard time for many quarters in this industry, then maybe it's time to maybe you get worried then. I'm not worried about cybersecurity. We're it's here. It's here to stay. I think that we're going through a spasm right now, and a lot of it has to do with the dollars, right? With how much companies raised and what options do they have with regards to their investors now that they've taken certain valuations and certain amount of funding and things like that. So we're in I think we're having a bit of a spasm in the industry. I don't think it's going anywhere. So I would say stay calm, keep your ear to the ground, of course, stay open, but don't panic. You know, everybody's going through it right now.
If folks are interested in getting in touch with you, is there a good place where they can reach out to you?
Sure. I like to think I'm very approachable. So if you do see me on LinkedIn, please feel free to reach out. I think I have an open profile. McIntyreassociates.com is my website. You can learn more about my background. There's some media on there as well. And also my phone number and email address are available there as well. So anybody who's listening, if you'd like to connect with me, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Kyle, you're awesome to make some time for us today. I'm sure people will benefit from the advice. And I'll be sending you my resume pretty soon. You can take a look at it.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for the invitation, Ed. I hope to be back sometime.
Great to see you, Kyle. And for the rest of you watching, we'll see you next time.